Um, Welcome, everyone. I wonder, we are a small group, so for those of you who are far away, you will also be finding it difficult to see us, so please come closer. And there's some coffee and tea if you want, some chocolates in the back. And while people are getting ready, I just want to welcome everyone, both of you here in Oslo at the Peace Research Institute, but also those online. There are quite a few who've signed up for this seminar on transforming society through community-engaged research, a conversation with Halleh Ghorashi, who I will introduce shortly. The event is co-organized by the Center for Culture, Conflict and Coexistence, as well as the PRIO migration team. My name is Cindy Horst, and I'm a research professor here at PRIO. I've been around for a while now, and I have the great pleasure of engaging in a conversation with you, Halleh. After which we also want to extend the conversation to you in the room. Unfortunately, not online, but for those of you who are here, I'm looking forward also to bringing you into the conversation. I wanted to start by saying that I've known Halleh for several decades. We lived in the same place in a town called Nijmegen, university city in the Netherlands. And then during my doctoral studies, I remember taking a course, feminist studies, which was taught by Halleh. And since then, she's been quite busy. So I thought I should introduce her properly. And it's a long list. Can't do everything. But Halleh Ghorashi, she's a full professor of diversity and integration at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, the VU in the Netherlands. And she combines a multidisciplinary background, and that includes anthropology, sociology, gender studies, political philosophy, organization studies, maybe more, with a critical approach to diversity and to migration and refugee studies. And her approach is narrative co-creative methodology. In 2016, I think she initiated the Refugee Academy together with a colleague, Elena Ponzoni. And the Academy aims to connect different types of knowledges and initiatives that are initiated to work on refugee inclusion in the Netherlands. And we will hear more about that today. Between 2005 and 2012, you held the Maxima Leerstoel, which is an endowed professorship that was connected to the Dutch Queen. In 2017, you received the highly competitive Vrije grant on a project Engaged Scholarship and Narratives of Change from the Dutch Research Council. And then you were appointed Crown Member of the Dutch Socio-Economic Council and the Royal Netherlands Academy of the Arts and Sciences. You received the Amsterdam Impact Award for your research on refugees and diversity, and you were appointed as a member of the State Committee Against Discrimination and Racism. So I think it's an understatement that you've been busy. And I could go on, but I'm pretty sure that people are here to hear from you and not necessarily just about you. So we're really here to learn in particular about your perspectives on engaged scholarship, which I'm really looking forward to hearing. Maybe a final point is that I have a book that is based, it's called Creative Resistance, and it's based on life stories of remarkable women, including Halleh. And in that book, I think it's quite clear also how your academic journey and your personal journey connects. So I thought maybe you could start out by giving some flesh to all these kind of big achievements and telling us a little bit about your academic journey and where it all started for you.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so overwhelmed with the introduction, so I don't know much how to start. But thank you so much for inviting me, and it's so great to be here. I have to admit that I never thought that you were my student at some point. I thought we were always colleague. So when I was thinking about the time I knew Cindy, I always thought we were both PhD researchers at the same time, living in the same space, in a kind of commune in Nijmegen, which was also a very interesting experience. So we can talk about it as well. Maybe I can say something about that now. But it's nice to know that you have followed the course I gave. So that is interesting. Maybe something about my background. I have been born in Iran. I was born in Iran in decades ago, and became very active in the Iranian Revolution of 1979 as a student, a high school student. I was there at that time 17 years old, and became very involved in the politics in Iran as a Marxist. At that time, Marxist activist. So I was very active as a student leader in my high school. For me, the dream was to become a kind of freedom fighter. That was actually at the time, that was my dream. And then I went, but I was also struggling with theories, with academia, because I really liked reading, which doesn't really fit the activist kind of, the activists I knew at that time, they didn't really appreciate that much of theorizing. They wanted to take action. So for me, it was a kind of paradox of how to deal with it and how to find my way. And then I went to, it was the 8th of March, International Women's Celebration in the University of Tehran after the revolution. So there was actually, we had 2 years of a kind of power vacuum. So it was very interesting time of a lot of discussions, a kind of openness towards different ideas and different organizations. So the universities became actually a kind of very interesting place of lectures, discussions in those years. And I remember vividly that it was 8th of March, and this very acknowledged historian, a female historian, Homa Natiq, was giving a lecture about women's rights. And I was listening to that lecture, and there were about 5,000 people present for that lecture. It was huge, and there was, everybody was completely mesmerized with her talk. And for me, she was the first person who showed me how engaged scholarship can look like. That you can combine a very rigorous kind of research as a historian, and also struggle with justice, for justice. So activism in a way, and scholarship. But then at that time, I didn't really dare to dream that I become one myself, because I was still struggling with what will happen to me after I had to, at some point, leave Iran, became, as an asylum seeker, I came to the Netherlands in '88. So that dream of becoming an engaged scholar was far, far away. So then the dream was there, but it was actually a bit marginalized. So then I started to study anthropology. And what struck me as a refugee woman from the Middle East when I was living in the Netherlands was the lack of engagement with refugee voice. So I saw a lot of categories, percentages, numbers about refugees, but I didn't see myself in those presentations. The representation of refugee women was so far away from my experience. So I thought, okay, there is a kind of homogenization going on, but also a kind of very special form of homogenization. So that was actually more what I called in my work, that deficit approach, that refugees, per definition, have shortcomings, and refugee women, especially from Middle East, they are suppressed by their men in their lives, so they need to be emancipated. So both aspects was for me so challenging. I was like, where is my voice? So then when I started as an anthropologist, my my kind of engagement was more to bring the voice through narratives, through life stories methodology, through doing qualitative narrative methodology, presenting the voice of the groups, in this case refugee women, who are actually underrepresented in the debate, public debate, and in academia also. So that was the start of engagement. But it evolved at some point, and that is the time we met each other, actually, in Nijmegen. And we were living, and that was very interesting, because I came as a Marxist activist. I came to the Netherlands, and then when I started my PhD in Nijmegen, there was this communal living. So I was like, my dream is coming true. I go to a commune, I live there. But that was a very weird experience, I have to admit. So it wasn't, so that was for me the experiencing that place, that were people who were alternative thinkers, critical thinkers, but not so much familiar with how to deal with others, the non-white others in society. So that was for me also a kind of struggle. Okay, being progressive does not mean being engaged. So that is also something that came into mind by living there, and then rethinking what does engagement mean. But I was also wondering, because you did also at the same time research about refugees in Kenya, and I was wondering, why did you choose for the research methodology you chose at that time, and what was your experience living there in that commune?
Okay, so now we're turning things around. That's interesting. Wow, those are big questions. I think maybe this is the time I say a little bit more about this commune, because people are getting the weirdest. I think what was difficult about it is that you have this idea of communal living. I don't know whether it's very common in Norway as well, where there's still a lot of individuality in how people lead their lives. And I think that that's often where it doesn't really match. So you have this dream of sharing and of collectiveness, but in reality, there isn't that kind of thinking. So I think that that's maybe what was tricky. But to relate to your question on my research, so I did research in northeastern Kenya, along the border with Somaliland. And I find it a bit difficult to talk about some of this research, because my journey has really moved quite far away from that. And what I'm doing now really comes from, and I think this actually came from a big debate that happened within something called Somali studies, where a number of young Somali scholars based in the US, started a debate on Adan studies, whiteness studies, and started asking questions about who creates knowledge, who has the right to come and to ask and to represent. A very important debate. I think there are many missed opportunities there, because very easily you start talking in fixed identities when the underlying issues then kind of disappear about what is knowledge, how is it that we know, how do power relations come into that. So currently I work very differently. I work with areas where I feel like, okay, my positionality, from that particular positionality, it makes sense for me to engage, and I do a lot of work through collaborations and co-learning. But I think we'll get back to that as well, because you'll talk more about how you see that. I wanted to ask you, because we talk about engaged research, but what does engaged research mean to you, and why is it important?
You refer to evolving. Of course, this is the thing that happened to me as well. So I have learned through my academic journey also, step by step, what engagement means and how you can think about engaged scholarship. So as I mentioned in the beginning, because collecting narratives or engaging with refugee women, that was more about giving voice, and that is most of you know about. So giving voice to the communities that are under represented. So that was my first step, and then I realized you can give voice and you can collect narratives, but if those narratives do not come into the attention of policymakers or people in the position of power, they can just ignore it and not do anything with it. So, and especially since the narrative approach is for policymakers, it's very difficult to deal with because they need, they see the evidence mostly through data which were collected statistically with the ambition of being representative. I don't know how representative that is, but that is actually the idea of representativeness of the data that they use for policy making. So then I realized at some point that if you really want to bring about change, for me it was important not only to collect narratives, but also to change the lives of refugees, actually make a better connection between their needs and their stories and the policymakers or people in organizations who were saying, we want to do something good. You know, that is also important to consider. For me, at that moment, also the definition of power changed. It was not so much, because I realized that power, what I faced in Iran was a very much a top-down approach of, oppression. It was a very visible form of power. And in the Dutch context, the power worked differently. It wasn't through oppression, but it was through normalization. So that certain kind of images were normalized in the practice of everyday life. So think about Foucault and discursive power. And even exclusion happened with the intention to include. And that was the doubleness of inclusion and exclusion that triggered my my idea of also the necessity of engagement with people in the position of power, and connect the narratives to bring different perspectives together and connect the narratives of refugees or other underprivileged groups to the attention of policymakers or other organizational actors, so that there is reflection about their normalized perspective. So to unsettle these perspectives that are very much normalized by the power of discourse, that became for me the engaged kind of research. So how do you bring these different perspectives, and then we organize what we call master classes or projects. It was not really co-creative at that time. It was more coming from, probably the work of Wright Mills, sociological imagination. The idea is actually connecting the individual narratives to the broader context, and through that create imagination or enlarge the imagination of the actors involved in certain processes. So that was more about connecting our knowledge as academics, what we know about the processes, what we know about how certain ideas historically are shaped about refugees, to connect and to bring these perspectives in that kind of contextual, embedded, in a way describe it or try to understand these perspectives through this lens of historical contextual knowledge. So in that sense, academic knowledge had a very important role in those master classes we organized, and we had several kind of people involved, and so people from NGOs were there, from policymakers, from the municipalities, but also national policymakers, the refugees themselves, and the project. One of the projects we had, which became very essential in my also developing this idea of engaged scholarship, was about refugees who want to find a work, and to be engaged in the labor market, and they couldn't get engaged. So in that, we brought all these actors who could help to create this process of inclusion. So the HR managers were there as well. So organizational actors, policymakers, NGOs who help refugees, and refugees themselves. And this, in that kind of exchanging perspectives, it became very clear. And one of the stories I always use is the story of Sarah. And that story is actually cornerstone of all my research at this moment I'm doing. We had these meetings with small meetings, and one of the subgroups was supposed to present a story about the strengths. People were supposed to talk about their strengths. What if they think back about their life, what was the moment in their life that they were very proud of, or it was, it showed their strength. And Sarah and all the refugee women present in those meetings, they didn't say much. At some point, we had to really delay a process and create more space for their stories to come up. And then Sarah presented her story in the plenary meeting. And that was, she said she came from Eritrea. She was actually a freedom fighter in Eritrea from very young age. And she came to the Netherlands 10 years later, before the discussions we had. And she said, from the moment I came to the Netherlands till now, the only thing I heard was no. Your language is not good enough. Your diplomas do not match. Your cultural competence is not good enough. So all these no's made me actually forget my story, that at some point I was a freedom fighter. I forgot about my strength. And that was an example of how an activist refugee becomes a passive victim in a way and loses her confidence and her story. And all this happens not all with bad intentions. And that became also clear because the HR manager, after the story of Sarah, said, oh my God, I just realized that I have said so many times to people that your language is not good enough and go back and learn it, because I want to help them and not to get disappointed when they apply for a job. But I didn't realize that first-generation refugees, no matter how many courses they follow, they never become native. And the expectation of organizations is a native speaker. So we have to work something on both sides. We have to also work in the organization and make them aware of what they are expecting is not actually possible. So, and that was a kind of a moment, several moments of reflection, and NGOs also realized that they are really focusing on deficit all the time, because this deficit approach is also, with the good intentions, helping the other instead of seeing their value and their contribution. So that was a very important moment of considering engaged scholarship in that way, to bring different perspectives, not per se co-creating knowledge, because still we, as academics, were there with our knowledge to teach the others how to see the context and how to understand the historical impact in their images, but it was a next step, I would say, in my kind of narrative, my kind of engaged scholarship, I would say.
When you were talking about, in the beginning, you were talking about giving voice, and I saw this kind of wonderful statement somewhere like, okay, stop giving voice, but pass on the mic. And in a way, it's kind of, it relates a bit to that, at least how I hear you, because it's basically about, okay, can we create spaces where there is a possibility to share perspectives and really to understand where different people come from. Not by speaking on behalf of them, but actually passing on the mic and then seeing, okay, one of the things that I often try to do is to see within that space what can my role be to really help that process of understanding these differences. And I don't know whether, I personally feel that that's a good job for an anthropologist. Kind of really to try to understand, okay, from that particular position, what does it look like? But from that position, what does it look like? And then what happens and where do things How can understanding go deeper? Um, which is in a way about co-learning as well.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I really love that statement. Like, just pass on the mic. Yes, just pass on the mic. It's not as simple because it also depends on the power context and who listens and all these other things. But I think it's a very important first starting point.
May I say something
Yeah.
in that? Because one of my colleagues just defended her thesis. And she was saying that actually giving voice, she was saying that these disadvantaged communities are shouting, but nobody listens. So actually, instead of giving voice, you have to actually develop the competence to be more receptive to what they are saying. So that is also maybe a different way of approaching it, as you say, because they are already shouting, but we have a role in magnifying what they are saying in the process of decision making.
But you also, I mean, there's an underlying assumption here. You're talking about engaged research as a way of transforming society. But is that the academic's job? Should we be transforming society? Because I'm sure there are a lot of people who would actually say, no, our job is to collect data, analyze data, to write, and then there's others who go and do something with that kind of carefully, neutrally created knowledge.
That's very interesting, because that is exactly for me the next step. Because at some point I went to the International Sociological Association that was in Japan some years ago, and Michael Buravoy, who is a public sociologist, was at the time president of ESA, and gave a lecture. And at that time, Pope Francis was the one who was really stealing all the global attention about poverty. Do you remember that he had all these talks and all this engagement with poor people? He was really engaging with people in poverty and tried to really magnify their position. And then at that time, Piketty's book, Capital, came out as well. So he was saying, the inequality is the topic of sociologists. I started as anthropologist, then I went to sociology. So he was saying that actually it is our topic, but look around and see who are talking about it and make it global issue. It is Pope and it is Piketty, an economist. And where are sociologists? So for me, that was a moment and I thought, okay, where are we? And then I had to think about this critique of academia and the notion of ivory tower and the disconnectedness of academics writing about people, but not really engaging with them. And then I had to think about my own life. I thought there was a lot of policy making in the Netherlands about refugees was done based on collaboration with researchers who claimed neutrality, who claimed objectivity. But because of this connection with refugee lives, made kind of recommendations that actually, in a way, reproduce this deficit approach. And that was, for me, really, I thought, okay, to really address that and understand how this kind of approaches of refugees consistently become reproduced, what is our role as academics? And this is not only about transforming, it's about being complicit in certain kind of reproduction of images. And how can we challenge that? And I know a lot of good quantitative researchers who are very critical of policy. And I know also a lot of qualitative researchers who are complicit in reproducing deficit approach. So I don't want to make a kind of methodological struggle, war here. For me, it's about how critical scholars from which position of methodology they come, how they can make the critical approach tangible in changing lives. And that is something where academics are still, I see a responsibility for academics to do so. And there is a growing importance of valorization in all the research we are doing, because otherwise we are considered to be not important enough in the processes of change in society. If we do not take up their own role as co-creators of change, and not impose our role as people with ideas who know how the change would be, but to co-create knowledge, transformative knowledges with the people who are living it, living inequality, living poverty, living marginalization. I think that is a very important role we have to think about. And when I came back from Japan, I thought, okay, that is, so the kind of engaged scholarship we have been doing at that time, bringing perspectives together, does not really challenge the authority of academia. And I thought, okay, next step for me would be to do that, to really create a kind of equal position for academics and other forms of knowledge to enable co-creation. So actually question academia and what we have been doing and what we are doing. So not to put ourselves in the, because I was thinking about the hierarchies of knowledge. If you think about hierarchies of knowledge, academic knowledge, policy knowledge, professional knowledge, and then you have experiential knowledge, then you have embodied knowledges, which is always on the bottom. So I thought, okay, if you really want to create the co-creation from a, in a way, equal way of co-creating, you have to also challenge this hierarchy. And that was the start of the engaged scholarship proposal, which I wrote for our science organization, NWO. And I wrote it for, you mentioned as a prestigious, it's very prestigious kind of funding, because you get it based on the individual achievement. And almost you don't engage scholars get that kind of achievement in that line. So when I wrote that, and after 3 times trying, I got it, and that was very, I saw a lot of reactions in the public space also, that somebody with my background and my kind of research got that kind of funding, which was amazing. And that is when I could do more and show, if you really want to bring about change, you have to engage with communities and acknowledge communities' knowledges, acknowledge indigenous knowledges as valuable knowledges that are important to think about change, societal change. And for that to happen, we have to decenter the hierarchical position of academic knowledge, and then recenter it as well when it's needed. So it is not completely, say, our knowledge have no value, but to decenter it to create the equality of co-creation, and recenter it when our knowledge is valid and valuable for the others to work with, because we have also something to offer. And that has been the project we have been doing for the last 5 years, and it's comparative research in the US, Netherlands, and South Africa, with communities, and really centered community knowledges in our work.
And this Refugee Academy that you've been mentioning a few times, does that also fit in with that same approach, with this kind of co-learning? Could you say more about how did you go about, what is it?
And I went too fast. Yeah, actually, when we saw, based on our earlier work with the projects I mentioned, and Sarah's stories came from, when 2015, this kind of so-called refugee crisis happened, we call it government crisis, happened at that time. So everybody, started to do new things. So the societal initiatives were very active in the Netherlands. They really felt that the government is failing, so they wanted to, step up and do their own, started to have a lot of beautiful ideas presented to include refugees. And then a lot of migration studies scholars became refugee experts, and that was and then many refugee studies experts were forgotten. And I was like, let's bring all these knowledges and connect it, because all the initiatives would start from the zero. Actually, we have a lot of societal initiatives in other fields we can learn from. So let's bring all these knowledges together. So from the past and from the present, so horizontal forms of different knowledges and historical forms, bring it together in a kind of academy to learn more, to listen to each other, to learn from each other, and to have this kind of, understanding or co-creation of knowledges that we can learn from, to do better, to do more, and go deeper in understandings of. So that has been Refugee Academy. We started there, and we were very active for about 1.5 years with a lot of meetings, brought different groups together. But then COVID happened, so we couldn't do that much of gatherings. But we started doing a lot of projects during the COVID. And one of these is the Learning Crossroads, that we actually mapped all the societal initiatives as much as possible in the Netherlands that did something about refugees, and then learned from them, and that they learn from each other. So we had and then the Vrije project that you mentioned, Engaged Scholarship project, came from there as well. So that was the base of how that experiences we have, what we learned from those community, engagements. So then we thought, okay, the community engagement is very important for our academic knowledge. So we started with that project. So that was a kind of involvement of that as well.
Mm. I'm just realizing that there's quite a few people in the room who might have either similar initiatives or are thinking a lot about engaged scholarship. So I want to also make sure that there's space for that. You can think a bit. If there's immediate questions, let us know. Yes. And could you also just introduce yourself?
Please.
And yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for this interesting conversation. I'm a researcher as well. Since I don't know so much the background, I'm curious about when you say the community knowledge, including the indigenous knowledge. Yes, this is, it's very important and become quite popular, but I'm wondering, when you include the indigenous knowledge, at the end of the day, all the academics get the points, get a title, promotion, big prestige funding, but how maybe in your research, how the community actually get benefit? Could you elaborate more on it? I have one more.
Yes.
And when you said sometimes inclusion might lead to exclusion, I would be very happy if you also elaborate what you mean by that. Yeah, thank you very much.
And also just to say that I mentioned questions, but at the same time also sharing of examples or just ideas about what you've had is that works very well too. But I think it would be a very good moment to reflect a bit more about maybe go deeper a bit on this kind of community engagement and what it means and what it also brings to the communities.
Yes.
At first.
Start with that. Yes. It is a very important question, because that is what from my project, the project ended. Now we are writing publications, and one of the sections of the book we are writing is about complexities of engaged scholarship, because especially the PhD researcher was part of the project and did research in South Africa, and really engaged meaningfully with LGBTQ plus refugees or undocumented forced migrants there, felt so helpless, because at some point then her project was done and the community was left behind. And she and knowing that it was, as you know, probably in South Africa there is a lot of violence against queer refugees and migrants in general. So for her, living at that moment of time, that there is so much anti-migrant movement and not being able to really do something about it was very, very painful. But at the same time, what she did was to create actually, to bring in the knowledges of cooking, so a kind of indigenous knowledge of cooking, and to make a cookbook and present it internationally, and to also make them, very much known about how through cooking, the relationships are with the parents, or the parents, when you are queer, and what is a lot of assumptions do not work in that way, and how they create new homes and new connections through cooking and through food. That was one of the ways to create space and give meaning and show the importance of the background and knowledges of the community. Another one, which was a different one, another PhD, was actually a South African PhD researcher. And she worked together. There was this project, Meraka Village project, in which there was this co-creation between the scholar and a community, very knowledgeable woman, about how to make buildings that are not that expensive. How do you use indigenous knowledge of making buildings, combine it with modern ideas about it to create sustainability? And then they created this village together, and she did research about that. And by doing that research and showing the value of such kind of collaboration and co-creation of knowledge has been so essential for the university to realize, because they thought that is a kind of something very sweet. But then to realize that the whole idea of community engagement that they have been doing didn't really show the equal kind of partnership which is needed to make it sustainable for the people living in the communities. And this, what they talked about something luxury and nice, that is actually the core what is needed. So by doing that research, she was able to shift the attention towards what is really community engagement. So these are examples of, it is not easy. It was for her, was it easier to do it because she was herself there, and the other PhD researcher that was herself from an indigenous background, but from Latin America, was not from South Africa, so it was more difficult to create continuity in her, the way she wanted to do engage with community. So there is always, what we learn is important if you really want to center the community knowledges. You have to engage with people, or bring in people from the community as researchers, so that they can stay and then continue their career connected to the community. Because now, that is very interesting, she got a postdoc position, I just heard the day before yesterday, to do that, community engaged, advise the universities how to shape community engagement and do research about it, which is that kind of things we want to have actually in terms of continuity. Mm-hmm. And the question, do you want to say something about this?
If it's okay, I would like to say something about this idea also about what transformation means and what co-learning means in a way, because very often we think about shifts like happening, so we need to influence or relate to kind of the powers that be, etc. But if transformation is actually seen as something that happens in day-to-day interactions and in how we live, then being in space together to really learn about a topic and really getting better insight, like everything we do as researchers also influences how people understand. So to me, these co-learning approaches are also very much about creating possibilities of transformation in that process in a way, so that if you bring together, just to be very concrete, I'm working on a project which is about locally led humanitarian assistance, and there we have a humanitarian lab where we work together with people who like different people, so people who are from these locally led organizations, but also from international organizations. And it's really about what happens in that space and what we're learning that can lead to shifts. And those shifts happen by people getting better insights, by connecting, and then as a researcher in that process, what I can do is see, oh, maybe, like in a way, also connecting people and to get a better understanding of what is needed. But so it's really about how do we understand transformation? Where does it happen? How does it happen? And if we understand that it happens in everyday interactions, and it's very chaotic and very complex, and it's not this kind of one linear as we like to think about it, especially in this kind of development field. Like you have A and then you do B and then C appears. No, life is really, really messy. And I think it's a lot about these kind of connections and creating understandings between people. But it's a different understanding of what transformation actually is and how it comes about. So to me, co-learning is all about transformation in the process of doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want
I have a question for you.
Okay.
You know, you mentioned that when I asked you about your start of your research, you said, you know, actually your answer was I am so far away from it that I don't want to say much about it. But what I realized that actually from the start you were quite engaged, because what I learned from your PhD research was that you engaged with the Somali diaspora in dialogues. Actually, you presented your work and you went into dialogue with them through internet, through forums and digital fora, to really, you know, to also challenge your assumptions and challenge your position. So you made it very hard for yourself to make, you know, analyze your data, because you brought so many voices from the people who are actually, you know, have embodied knowledges, and also they have maybe embedded knowledges in the way that they are scholars or themselves. So there was a kind of engagement. But how would you call what you are doing now so different than then? What?
I think I was always playing around with like who has knowledge and how it's created. So I was teaching because I did a course. I did refugee studies in Oxford. So I was teaching part of the courses there to refugees in the camps. Because I felt that was important for them to learn. But of course, learning about refugee rights doesn't really matter much in a refugee camp where no one upholds those rights. Still, and kind of also methods, research methods, those kind of things. Another thing I did was that I was challenging who could ask questions to who. So even then I was doing that by having a small project where young refugees who are trained all these different things would go out with laptops and interview people working at the international organizations to ask about the rations and those kind of things as a part of a research project. That didn't really go very well. They weren't very much welcomed to be asking those questions. But to me, what is different is this kind of question that I really started having more and more about, like this idea of extractive research, that you go in somewhere and you have this idea of like, I'm here to collect knowledge and information and I take it away, and with that knowledge I go and do something. I don't know, I mean, I'm pointing at you because I've started then leading different projects where I started playing around with, are there different ways of doing this? Like, for example, also working with comics and animations and kind of having different ways of thinking about how we learn and how we share that knowledge. But it's, for me, it's always been about this kind of, shaking up this power hierarchies of who has the right to ask questions and who has to go and answer them for whose benefit. So I guess that what shifted is that I've just become more and more uncomfortable in this whole procedure. and thinking more and more about alternative ways of doing it. So like several of you in the room also, you have backgrounds in art, so you experiment with art as an alternative. Can we do something there instead of just using the verbal? Or so I'm feeling I'm constantly experimenting, trying to find, but it comes from this like increasingly strong discomfort with this idea of the academic as the expert coming in somewhere, taking something, and then. So I would also really love to hear, like several of you have different ways of doing this, and maybe asking themselves also similar questions to hear. Yes.
Use the mic. Yes.
So earlier sometime I used to be working on migration research in Norway. Like in Norway, the migration refugee research is relatively new in the sense that in the 70s, the non-white migration coming in here, you see. Then there was immigration stop in 1975. And one of the reasons for the stop was they said there's a housing issue here, so we need to stop immigrants until housing situation is better. Then the government announced research funds for looking at the migrant communities kind of things. So in my view, the co-creation of knowledge was a co-creation of knowledge for the government, for the authorities, with the researchers, you see, because they wanted to develop policies and put in place, different measures so that, as Cindy says, the communities became kind of extractive, you see. So you create sort of collect data from them, have interpreters going around with questionnaires and stuff, and come back and collect and kind of things, and then maybe one or two sessions yourself, this is what we found out kind of a thing. So what I'm saying is that nurturing long-term engagement with communities, that's where I think the major challenge is. Otherwise, they will remain to be sort of a, extracted, group that you get knowledge from, and not necessarily, on the other hand, it'll be counterproductive, you see. And like when I did some research on how Norwegian visa has been granted to Pakistani immigrants, I was, interviewing people at the visa offices in Pakistan and other places as well, you see. So after results came, so the government is not willing to understand how the process of the questionnaire was being developed, how the interviews, the family reunification was done. They copied the British example, like as Verity Saifullah Khan, you might possibly know from Oxford, research on migration, looking at these things. So I'm just wondering how do you sort of change the paradigm, because funding is also important. You don't get funding for doing research unless you think it satisfies the government's research needs, etc., etc. I think that's something that we need to look into. Thanks.
How to change the paradigm? That is a very important question as well. I think Norway is very similar to the Netherlands in a way that, and that is very interesting because I was writing about the findings of our project. I realized that the welfare state societies and Northern European societies have a very specific form of policy research engagement. Because the idea is that the government wants to do well. So the intention, at least till recently, the intention of government is to really help the disadvantaged communities. So the whole idea of welfare state is to bring welfare. So in that sense, the researchers are more in helping the government to do their job better. But the problem with that is the other side of this idea of welfare, which is in a way creating this group of categories of people who need to be helped. So the welfare states have also this kind of historical element or historical process of thinking of categories of people who need to be made equal. And for that, government intervention is essential to make them equal. So this deficit approach that I referred to is exactly much stronger in welfare state societies because of this idea of hierarchical idea of helper and the receiver of help, which is also something which in refugee studies has been stressed by Barbara Halleh, and others, that the NGOs especially doing that. So the change of paradigm, in my view, is to change this humanitarian paradigm as something which has inclusion as its idea, but become exclusionary because you only see the groups of people as people who do not have agency but need to be helped. So that can be helpful also for the discussions with scholars who have been really in the past 20 years helping the government, maybe even more. They're very much engaging with government's ideals and creating this doubleness of inclusion and exclusion, not questioning it, but reproducing it in their research. How can we make that actually question that? So for the first time in my life, I wrote a piece in the ethnic and migration studies, ethnic and racial studies, in which I really questioned the whiteness of the researchers, the white privilege of the researchers in migration studies in the Netherlands, who, because of taking for grantedness of their position, they could claim neutrality and objectivity, and excluded the scholars of color, especially the ones who addressed the critical race studies. So how could that happen? And what we can learn from that? And for me, I was not daring enough to do that earlier in my work. But at some point I said, I don't have anything to lose now. So I should really bring this point to that. And that is some of my colleagues that I like very much, but still I think that the way they handled the discussion of critical race studies in the 80s, it was really problematic. They excluded colleagues of color who raised that issue, and so we have to really, that is the way maybe to change the paradigm, to say the things as they are, and at some point people in my position who do not have much to lose, to really take up this discussion. And because the struggle I have is that when I criticize humanitarian paradigm or criticize progressive thinkers who are critical but not engaged, I don't want to weaken the progressive movement. But I think the only way to really strengthen the movement is to question these kind of paradigms. And that is also what I try to do in my way of changing that. And yeah, it is not easy because you have to struggle in different fronts. But I think there are more and more openings, especially the questioning of whiteness, privileged position of academics, white academics, as distant and objective, and the academics of color as too involved. These are the discussions that are really going on also in migration studies. For the first time in the couple of years, I don't know if you know IMISCO network, probably you do, European Migration Network, which has been very much mainstream kind of network, but now we have reflexivities in migration studies standing committee. We have race and migration studies, anti-racism. So there is a lot of discussions going on, and young scholars are bringing that up. For young scholars, they want something, because they are very much connected, maybe through social media with global discussions, and see the dangers of reification of categories. That is something also is coming our way, everywhere, actually.
Cecilia, you have the last.
Thank you, Halleh. My name is Cecilia Salinas. I am a visual anthropologist, or I am a visual artist and anthropologist. I combine those. I wanted just to share I am listening to you, and it's very inspiring. At the same time that also I feel the discomfort, because in relation to my own work, because sometimes I don't know if I make me believe that what I am doing is not extractivism. Sometimes I'm believing, should I quit research? Because it's like, as an anthropologist, what I am doing is going to people, talking, creating relationships, but then it's very limited to what I can give to that specific community. And then, since I am very committed to epistemic justice, I feel that what I am doing and writing, it's about trying to bring to the diversity of different ontoepistemologies that exist, but at the same time, it's not at the end of the day. I sometimes I tell myself I am not doing this extractivism, because at least in the last research I was working with the Mapuche people from what today is Patagonia in Argentina, and they have been being persecuted. There are a lot of they are struggling a lot, and the state is very colonialist, and it's very limited what I can do, and with their life, with all the struggles they have. So the only I do is sharing and listening their stories and sharing their everyday life. But but at the end of the day, I sit with this discomfort, and I am feeling for whom are the research I am doing. So just some reflections about that.
I saw you also wanted to maybe just that.
My name is Butta Defi. In fact, I'm a civil society. I'm neither a researcher or academic, but I have read anthropology, and I'm a health economist. And my reflection is this knowledge production, the notion of knowledge production, really. Really, first I have to thank this conversation. I think that the asymmetry of knowledge production from its very beginning is, I don't know if I'm wrong, is problematic, because we study others, and othering still we do have our own lenses, perspective, and the motive. We are in a globalized world, and the communication is now have control over communication. Still, this knowledge production, researchers, as Cecilia said, is very limited, because everything is the resource available for few who are very privileged, like probably Professor Halleh. And I think we have to rethink this research in general. And now, sorry to say, we can't see a very peaceful world, whether it is a very modern Western society or the others who have been underprivileged. So this knowledge production, it's better to rethink. I don't know if I'm so very illusionist. So, for example, I'm from Ethiopia, a wider Oromo society in Norway now. We have become the largest diaspora, and even Ethiopia is a very oldest country, but still we have a problem of this conflict, the civil, which is so. It's nothing. It's not only special to Ethiopia, but this is the trend that we are seeing. So I wonder how knowledge can contribute to a better place for all. This very so. When I love the conversation, and it's interesting as immigrant who have been here for 20 years, and still what this transformation, I think it has been said, I can't see the really transformation for those who supposed to be transformed. So,
Okay. Thank you so much. I think you have like 1 minute. We're a bit over time to say something uplifting about the role of research and real radical transformation. I think that's what you're asking for.
I think the last sentence you use is very interesting. Who needs to be transformed? And that is something that that is the core aspect of the engaged scholarship. I think all of us need to be transformed. Because if you want to have epistemic justice, it means that we have to also be able to question our own epistemic position as academics, as people who are in privileged position. So we have to transform to be more receptive to the others and the epistemic knowledge of the others, so that you can create layers of knowledge. And one of the scholars that I like very much is Puig de Blacasa. And she says, researching with, when you do research with, so you co-create, co-produce knowledge together with other actors, societal actors, your knowledge becomes thicker, because every knowledge that comes and adds to the process makes your knowledge of certain issues thicker. If you realize that, and to be able to just question your own limited perspective of the world, that means that we have to transform all the actors. They have to be able to transform to be more inclusive. And this is more needed than ever before. So if there is any paradise in this global hell we are now experiencing, that is the paradise we can make together in small niches in the society. It doesn't come with big revolutions, because I had the revolution and I saw what happens. Revolution, it goes fast. It doesn't pay attention. Is not patient for inclusion of difference. We need to do this, and these are the connection in these niches. Medina talks about chains of connection. The imaginations that there are people around the world in these niches doing this, and these chains can be the hope against this time, which is very troubling.
Thank you so much, Halleh. Thank you, everyone, and join me in applause.
Thank you.